In sight. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Steve Kornacki in for Chris Matthews. President Trump and congressional Democrats are no closer to a deal to reopen the government as that partial shutdown barreled today into its 14th day. Emerging from a nearly 2-hour meeting inside the White House this afternoon, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the talks contentious. President Trump called them productive. Democrats saying and President Trump admitting that he told them he is ready to keep the government shut down as long as it takes to get money for a wall.
We told the president we needed the government open. He resisted. In fact, he said he'd keep the government closed for a very long period of time, months or even years.
He also said, you said in the meeting, this is him quoting you, I just want to check, that the shutdown could go on for months or even a year or longer. Did you say that? And
I did.
Is that your assessment of where we are?
Absolutely, I said that. I don't think it will, but I am prepared. I hope it doesn't go on even beyond a few more days. It really could open very quickly.
The president's comments came in a lengthy Rose Garden news conference following that meeting with congressional leaders from both parties. President Trump and congressional Democrats remain at odds over his demand for $5.6 billion for a wall. Trump said he is convening working groups from both the White House and Congress through the weekend to come up with some sort of a solution to the impasse. As the shutdown reaches the 2-week mark now, the president was asked about the delay.
Why did it take this many days for a working group to come together? Why didn't you just hash the details out today?
Well, sometimes that's what happens in a negotiation. It does take longer than it should, and sometimes you agree to things that could have been agreed to 2 weeks ago, but that's just the way a negotiation is.
But with Congress adjourned until Tuesday, the standoff is almost assured of lasting at least until Wednesday at the very earliest. The president was asked if he would consider bypassing Congress in some way to build the wall.
So you don't need congressional approval to build the wall?
No, we can use them. Absolutely. We can call a national emergency because of the security of our country. Absolutely. No, we can do it. I haven't done it. I may do it. But we can call a national emergency and build it very quickly. And it's another way of doing it. But if we can do it through a negotiated process, we're giving that a shot.
So is that a threat hanging over the Democrats?
I never threaten anybody. But I am allowed to do that, yes.
Second question.
Called a national emergency.
For her part, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the two sides made some mild progress today.
Do you make any progress on a dollar figure for what the president wants or what you all want from him?
How do you define progress in a meeting when you have better understanding of each other's position? When you eliminate some possibilities, if that's a judgment, then we made some progress.
I'm joined now by New Jersey Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer, former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo from Florida, Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer for The Washington Post, and Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the Associated Press. Thank you all for being with us. Congressman,
thank you.
You're the only one on this panel with a vote in this potentially, if and when it comes to that. So let me start with you. The president said today that he told those congressional leaders that he'd be willing to let this go on for months, maybe even a year. What is do you think it is realistically possible, this thing, we're measuring it in 2 weeks right now, is it possible this could stretch on into months?
I mean, I think that's absurd. I think what we need to do is actually stay at the table, both sides, and keep working together until we get the government reopened. And I just don't understand. We passed this week out of the House legislation to reopen the government. One of the first moves the Democrats did, and we did it this week. It's going to go to the Senate now. It's basically what they passed a couple weeks ago in a bipartisan way. It passed this week in a bipartisan way, including members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which Carlos was a member of until recently. And I just don't see why we can't get together and get the government back open.
Well, let me ask you, is that the Democratic position now? Because it's what it sounded like listening to the Democratic leaders today, saying they went into that meeting telling the president, just reopen the government first, then have that discussion, have that negotiation over border security, fencing, wall, whatever, it's going to be, whatever any side is going to want to call it there. Is the Democratic position now, though, just clean continuing resolutions to open this and no negotiation of any other sort until and unless that happens?
Well, I know what my position is. I don't know what the other positions are, but I'll tell you this. I think we should sit at the table and talk to each other. You should reopen the government because that just makes sense. It's costing us in productivity. It's costing us dollars. It's costing small businesses not getting loans here in my district. It's air traffic controllers told me the skies are at risk. So what I think we need to do is reopen the government, and then, of course, we should be talking about having tougher borders, and there's plenty of options on the table. We should continue that discussion, and we should keep working on it. There's no reason why you can't do both. And so I think it's a false choice, and I think we should do our responsibility, the right thing, which is get the government back open and work on making sure our borders are secure.
Okay, the other piece of this, one of the other pieces of this, John Lemire, you heard that clip there, the president saying there's this idea of invoking a national emergency and building this somehow by executive fiat. I know he raises this possibility of dramatic, if vague, executive action from time to time. Does this fall in the category of bluster, or is there something going on in the background here where the White House is actually prepared to try to make some kind of executive move on this?
There have been a few initial steps to look at it. It's unclear whether he actually does have the authority, whether it would be a legal thing for him to do. But I think this more falls under the category of the president sort of talking big, being presented with, wanting to present an option that is better than what he's currently faced, because he's in a little bit of a corner right now. And I think there's a growing reality in the White House that that's what's happened here, that he caved to the pressure of members of the conservative media who said to him that if you take this original deal that didn't have the money for the wall, that's a loss. You're throwing away your presidency. And he balked. He had signaled he was going to sign it. He was signaled he was ready to go forward with this, and he changed his mind. And this is a moment where there are not that many Republicans. We're seeing some signs of strain in the Senate right now. Some who have said, Susan Collins and a few others, have said that they should reopen the government, that this should not be how we do this, that the Homeland Security, the border security stuff should be separate to the idea of the government being open. But the president, as he so often does, is focused almost exclusively on his base, believing that they are behind him for this fight. They think that this is why he was sent to Washington. This was his signature campaign promise. He's to upend government, and that he thinks that if he were to suddenly cave right now, he might, for the first time, risk losing even some of that support.
Well, you mentioned those Republican senators, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins. One person who was conspicuously absent from that Rose Garden today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. According to the New York Times, quote, McConnell for the first time is facing pressure from members of his own party to step in to resolve the stalemate. But McConnell told Politico, I don't see how that leads to an outcome, and I want to get an outcome. That will be determined by the president and Senate Democrats. Here is what Trump said when asked why McConnell wasn't in the Rose Garden.
Why is he not here in the Rose Garden?
Because he's running the Senate. I mean, Mitch McConnell has been fantastic.
Well, Carlos Curbelo, somewhere in this chain here, House Democrats, Senate Republicans, Trump White House, there has to be some kind of give here to get the government reopened. A lot of folks are looking at the Senate right now as the most likely place for that because of that dynamic we were just talking about here. Some of these Republicans, maybe who are up in 2020, who are more from swing states. Do you think that's a realistic possibility, that there will be pressure, political pressure from Republicans on the Senate side that budges this along?
I think it is a possibility, Steve. When we think about what's happened here, both sides in this conflict have kind of locked themselves into a labyrinth and turned off the lights. And I think there's one obvious way out. It's something Josh and I worked on in the 115th Congress, and that is a compromise on immigration, probably the most divisive issue in our country right now. There's a very elegant compromise out there that's been staring at members of Congress and the administration for 2 years, and that is more border security to fight drug trafficking and human trafficking at the southwest border, combined with a permanent solution, a path to citizenship for DACA dreamers, for the young immigrants brought to our country as children. You're hearing more and more talk about this. Lindsey Graham is expressing a willingness to engage in this discussion. Vice President Pence has said this is a possibility. I think this is the obvious way out of this conflict where both sides can claim victory, because otherwise the only way out is for one side to appear to capitulate before the country. We know the president is in no mood to do that, and certainly Democratic leaders in the House and Senate aren't either. So I think that's the answer. And people in Congress need to listen to members like Josh Geitheimer and others, problem solvers, who can make these deals happen, who can sit at the table and actually find some consensus here. That's what I think is needed.
That possible compromise you're talking about, and yes, it has been floated before, did come up in the Rose Garden today. That possibility of DACA for border security, fence, wall, again, whatever anybody would end up calling it. The president seemed to be saying that court rulings last year had changed his thinking on that, but that does continue. The possibility does continue to linger out there that might ultimately be some kind of resolution here. But Jennifer Rubin, let me ask you about this as well. Obviously, political calculations here enter into the posture on any side. If somebody is feeling in a government shutdown the political heat we've seen in the past, that's always when that side will end up folding. Democrats, it doesn't seem, are feeling much political heat right now in terms of their posture on the House side. I'm wondering, just watching the president with that sort of stream of conscious press conference there in the Rose Garden today, the thought occurred to me more than once that he himself, I don't know about his party, but he himself might be enjoying this standoff.
I don't know if he's enjoying it or not. He certainly was incoherent, however. And if he's going to bring up these mysterious powers that he apparently has, he might want to ask the historians who were there when Harry Truman was in office and tried to seize the steel mills, and the Supreme Court said, no, you don't have these secret emergency powers. But he really is in a box, and I don't think it's fair to say that both sides are in a box. The Democrats are in the catbird seat right now. They voted to open the government. They're going through their agenda. They're going to push a whole bunch of bills onto the doorstep of Mitch McConnell. And what is Mitch McConnell doing? Nothing. I don't think that's a sustainable position for him or his members. Listen, he's a part of the first branch of government, too. And for him to sit back and say, I have no role here, I'm just a minion of the presidency and the White House, degrades the office that he has and degrades the United States Senate. So I think he's going to have to get off his backside and get into this. Why doesn't he vote on the bill that came over, or make changes to that bill and send it back, or put his own bill on the floor? Well, he's being entirely, at this point, passive, in part, I grant you, because he doesn't know what Trump is going to do. But you know what the solution to that is? The Congress makes a deal, they pass laws, they send them to the White House, and the executive branch decides if he's going to sign or veto them. That's how the system's supposed to work. The system is not supposed to work that the Senate gums up the works or the House gums up the works in order to protect the president from having to do anything. That's just not our system of checks and balances. And I don't think doing nothing is a solution for Mitch McConnell.
Carlos Cabello, let me ask you about that, because you know a little bit from the inside there on the Republican side on Capitol Hill how the thinking goes on these things. Try to put yourself, you're out of office now, maybe you could be a little bit more expansive in your thoughts here, but try to put yourself politically in the shoes of Mitch McConnell right now, who all the reporting suggests feels he got burned by the White House a couple weeks ago on this. He's got some members, a Cory Gardner from Colorado, who are starting to get politically uncomfortable. What is the play here for McConnell?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Steve. McConnell did get burned, and one thing that I learned about Mitch McConnell is that he only gets burned once on one issue, on any one issue, and I don't think he's going to proceed until he's sure that whatever the solution is can pass the House, can pass the Senate. Obviously, that means 60 votes. And get the president's signature. So I think in this case, Senator McConnell's really doing the best anyone could, given his position, which is just to encourage the White House and Democrats, both in the Senate and in the House, to negotiate until there's something that's amenable to all parties. And again, I think the only such solution is that DACA plus border security compromise. And I don't really see Senator McConnell moving. And part of the story here, Steve, is that the country has grown so numb to these shutdown situations. You look at the financial markets, they're kind of ignoring it. I think most Americans are ignoring this situation, obviously with the exception of the federal workers who are suffering through this. But the country is so sick of this shutdown drama. So many people don't take it seriously anymore. It's just another example, an indication of how far our politics have fallen in this country.
I just think that's totally wrong.
I just want to get... Well, one quick thing here. I want to just follow up, though, on this. Realistically, this idea, again, former Congressman Curbelo is putting it out there, DACA, border security deal, in terms of the White House's posture on this, we heard what the president said publicly today. Privately, is there any movement there?
There's been at least a rekindling of some discussion. In fact, it was telling last night. People I talked to close to the White House noticed that Sean Hannity on Fox News, who frankly sometimes acts as an unofficial White House spokesman, floated this very idea on his show last night. The question is, was that a float with the president's blessing, or was that his attempt to steer the president in a certain way, which we know sometimes advisors to Donald Trump find the best way to advise him is to do so through television. This is something that the president himself was they were considering this deal, let's remember, last year, a similar structure, and then of course, as he said today, the court stepped in and he sort of turned on it. They're not actively seeking out this deal, but I don't think they have ruled it out entirely just yet. It's going to depend on where else this goes in the next few days and weeks.
Okay. Thank you to Congressman Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey, former Congressman Carlos Curbelo from Florida, Jennifer Rubin from the Washington Post, and Jonathan Lemire. Coming up, Nancy Pelosi, the most powerful Democrat in American politics right now. MSNBC's own Joy Reid sat down with the new Speaker of the House today. She's here to give us a preview. Plus, are vulnerable Republican senators feeling any political heat to reopen the government? I'm going to head over to the big board. We're going to break down some interesting numbers there and more from the Rose Garden today, where President Trump said the shutdown could last months or even years. Are the American people going to be okay with that? And finally, let me finish tonight with Democrats and the I word. This is Hardball, where the action is.
This is Justin.
Hey,
Welcome back to Hardball. After 8 years in the comparative wilderness on Capitol Hill, Nancy Pelosi is now the most powerful and important Democrat in American politics, the Speaker of the House and the highest-ranking Democrat in Donald Trump's Washington. Pelosi claiming back the Speaker's gavel yesterday and joined by a large and diverse new class of Democrats. Those Democratic freshmen include 24 people of color, 42 female members, and the first Native American representatives, to mention just a few milestones. In the hours since retaking the majority, Pelosi and the Democrats have passed legislation with their offer to end the shutdown and introduced legislation on voting rights, ethics reforms, in a bid to require the release of presidential candidate tax returns. Obviously, if those bills make it out of the now Democratic House, they will still need to clear the still Republican Senate, where Mitch McConnell holds sway if they're ever going to reach it to the president's desk. Joy Reid, host of AM Joy, sat down with Speaker Pelosi for an exclusive MSNBC town hall. It's going to air at 10 o'clock tonight. She asked the new speaker about her relationship with Mitch McConnell. Let's watch.
Mitch McConnell, your colleague, your counterpart in the Senate, has made it clear that even though these were Senate bills that were passed by Republicans, that he won't put them back on the floor unless the president approves of them. How do you get around this conundrum if the other half of the first branch of government will only act at the behest of the president?
Well, I think that what Mitch McConnell is doing, and I say this as respectfully as possible, is saying we're not needed. Congress might as well stay home. All we need is one person to show up, Donald Trump. And that's not what our founders had in mind. They talked about co-equal branches of government. Article 1, the legislative branch, the people's branch of government.
And Joy Reid joins me now, again, counting down here to that town hall tonight. Joy, a lot of interesting stuff in here, but just to connect it to what we've been talking about, what everybody's talking about right now, this shutdown is still ongoing. So you see a little bit in the answer there you got from Pelosi, an attempt a little bit publicly maybe to shame McConnell into doing something. But how is that going to play out over the next few days, do you think, in terms of the dynamic between Pelosi and McConnell, the Capitol Hill side of this shutdown?
You know, I have to say, Steve, and I think you as a historian of sort of the way that Washington has worked, history is full of powerful speakers, the Tip O'Neill, Sam Rayburn sort of class of speakers, the Newt Gingriches, the people who wield considerable power in the body, and also full of powerful Senate leaders. You think of LBJ, of course, being the classic version, but at one time, Mitch McConnell styled himself that kind of Senate leader. When President Obama was in office for 8 years, Mitch McConnell wielded power quite ruthlessly and made it it very clear that the president was not a more important or powerful figure than him as far as he was concerned. As soon as Donald Trump was elected president, Mitch McConnell immediately, as did most Republicans, as did the former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, subordinated himself to this president. And he's still doing it. So I think what you saw today was Nancy Pelosi trying to push Mitch McConnell to say, guard the power of the United States Senate. Let's make ourselves once again a co-equal branch of government. This tradition of sending bills to the president's desk and letting him veto them if you want, it's gone. The current president doesn't have to veto anything because he has to approve before the United States Senate will even vote on a bill. I think both in her acceptance speech for the speakership and today in the interview that I did with her at Trinity, Washington University, Nancy Pelosi said, Mitch McConnell, do your job, guard the Senate, send a bill to the floor, and send the bill to the president's desk and let him veto it if he wants.
Well, another part of this town hall that, again, is going to air a couple hours from now. Pelosi was asked about what kind of challenges she faces as the most powerful female politician in the country right now. Let's watch.
Whatever the path is, whether it's right out of college or whatever, know your power. Just know your why. Why are you interested in public service or whatever it is, the academic world, military, corporate America, whatever it is. Know your why. Know your subject. Know why you're doing it. Know what it is. Know about it so that you can speak with authority on it. Have a plan. Be strategic. And communicate. If you show your vision, your knowledge, your plan, you will be able to attract. That connection is so important. Mm-hmm. And so have your own confidence. Don't worry about their hang-ups.
I guess that's an interesting question, too, just a broader one, and I'm curious what your sense of it, Joy, is what Nancy Pelosi's vision of the speakership is, because this is somebody, she's a legislative master. She understands coalition politics. Politically, she's a disciple. It was, 40 years ago, Phil Burton, who had the congressional seat before she did. He was a legislative master. She comes from that same school. What is her vision of this speakership in the Trump era?
Well, and we got to it a little bit later in the interview, talked a little bit more personally about. This is a woman who comes from a household of executives, 2 mayors, her brother as well as her father. She understands and is not embarrassed about wielding power. She sees the speakership the way that past speakers, the Tip O'Neill School, saw the speakership. It is a tremendously powerful office. It's called the 3rd most powerful office because of the vice president, but in a way it's the 2nd most powerful office. This office has the ability to go head-to-head with the president. She's not embarrassed about wielding that power. And I think what she was getting to in that answer, Steve, we're in this era where everything a woman who seeks power or holds power does gets hyper scrutinized, including by us. If you're dancing when you were in high school, we're going to scrutinize that. If you're cursing, we're going to scrutinize that. If you just want to be president, suddenly we're digging into everything about you and scrutinizing, down to your DNA. Women who seek power instantly get the question, are you likable? Are you being nice enough? Are you, it's a very different way that we treat men who seek power. And so one of the things that's unique about Nancy Pelosi, even before she was speaker, is she's not embarrassed about seeking power. She sought the speakership. She was clearly going to get the speakership. She wasn't going to be deterred by all these arguments about it being unlikable or unpleasant for a woman to step up and say, no, give me the gavel. She did it. She said, give it to me. She said, win however you need to win, say what you need to say, but when it comes time to vote for the speakership, I'm going to win. And I think that is a model for the way that women potentially can seek and hold power, that you don't have to worry about likability. This woman runs that body. She counts those votes. She doesn't put a bill on the floor that she doesn't think she can get passed. And she, more than anyone else besides Harry Reid and President Obama's persuasive powers, made health care happen, right? The Affordable Care Act. And now she's there to defend it. So I think that, her vision of the future, I even asked her what her legacy is going to be, is that the things that she wants done in government, she wants to be able to at least get to a vote. If those things don't pass the United States Senate, in her view, that's on Mitch McConnell. She's going to demonstrate what Democrats are capable of doing with power. And whether that's transparency, whether that's protecting health care, whether that's, environmental protection, she intends to show Democrats can do this led by a woman.
Okay, Joy Reid, again, the town hall with Nancy Pelosi. It's going to air 10 o'clock Eastern, 2.5 hours from now. Really good stuff there, Joy. Can't wait to watch it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And don't miss Joy Reid's wonderful show, AM Joy, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. Up next, going to head over to the big board, the shutdown and the Senate. Will the 2020 map lead to some surprise Republican cracks in the current standoff? This is Hardball, where the action is. All right, welcome back to Hardball. So we've been talking about it. Where is there going to be somebody, some group, some party that budges when it comes to the shutdown right now? Is there's the House Democrats, Senate Republicans, Trump, White House. We talked in the top of this show about the potential on the Senate side. And why? Because you got some Republican senators there who maybe are up for re-election next year in 2020, who maybe come from states that are swing states, vulnerable senators. Are they going to be the ones who feel the political heat and change the equation of the shutdown? So we thought we would take a look. Where might some of those senators be? So first of all, here we go. New Senate taking the oath of office yesterday. 47 Democrats, 53 Republicans. You got those two independents who caucus with the Democrats. That's the current balance of power. Now let's take a look here. Where are the Republicans who are going to be up for re-election next year in 2020? Every state that's painted in red, you got a Republican who's up for re-election next year. A lot of these are deep red states. They're not going to be competitive races. Probably not going to be a lot of political pressure on Republicans in those states. So this is going to be possibly in this mix of states, could you see Republicans who end up vulnerable in 2020? This gets a little more interesting. Take a look at this. Some of these are probably stretches. Kansas, Pat Roberts announcing today he's not going to be running for re-election. That's a very big stretch. You saw Democrats have a good midterm there. We put Mitch McConnell on here. I know it's Kentucky. Most recent polling we've seen on McConnell in Kentucky has his approval rating there in the 30s. Those are bad numbers, but really, where's the action here? Colorado. State that Donald Trump lost. Cory Gardner, he's already come out and he said, hey, Republicans, just pass a clean CR and reopen the government. Maine, that's the other state. Hillary Clinton won this in 2016. Maine. Trump didn't win this state. Susan Collins running for re-election in 2020. She's made some noise that suggests she's feeling at least some political heat that maybe is different from her colleagues, so keep an eye there. Arizona, remember Martha McSally just lost the Senate race, then got appointed to the other seat. Now she's got to run in 2020. This is a state Trump won, but only won narrowly in 2016, so keep a close eye there. I think Joni Ernst in Iowa, it's a Trump state, but it's one Democrats have some thoughts of maybe trying to claw back or at least get close to in 2020. Georgia, obviously Georgia, a state Democrats look at as, say, the future. They think they can compete there maybe in 2020. Could that be trouble for David Perdue next year? Of course, Texas, again, that might be a reach for Democrats. Beto O'Rourke did get within 3 points. John Cornyn running for re-election there. So again, that's the mix of senators. You'd have to see these folks, a lot of these folks really start to get publicly nervous about the politics of this. That could maybe change the thinking of Mitch McConnell, Republican leadership. By the way, the flip side, just want to show you this quickly. We talked so much in 2017 and 2018 about that dynamic of Democrats. Remember, 10 Democrats in 2018 in the Senate had to run for re-election, 10 Democratic seats in states that Trump had won, Trump country, Senate Democrats, their biggest challenge. How many of those are there going to be in 2020, by the way? Just two. Doug Jones in Alabama and Gary Peters up in Michigan. Of course, Michigan, a state Trump barely won. Only two. So that landscape for Democrats looks very different in 2020 than it did in 2018. So again, we'll have a lot more time between now and Election Day 2020 to talk about Senate races, but just wanted to give you a sense of how that might factor in to the current shutdown conversation. Up next, more from President Trump's wide-ranging, fact-bending news conference in the Rose Garden. You're watching Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. There appears to be no end in sight for the government shutdown after the president's lengthy press conference in the Rose Garden today. Digging in his heels, President Trump confirmed to reporters that he told Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer that the shutdown could continue for months or even years. The president was also asked about his remarks from last month when he told Democratic leaders that he would be proud to take responsibility for the shutdown. Let's watch.
Are you still proud to own this shutdown?
Well, you know, I appreciate the way you say that, but I'm very proud of doing what I'm doing. I don't call it a shutdown. I call it doing what you have to do for the benefit and for the safety of our country. We're going to be working very hard over the weekend, and we'll see if we can do something. So you can call it whatever you want. You can call it the Schumer or the Pelosi or the Trump shutdown. Doesn't make any difference to me. Just words.
And for more, I'm joined by the roundtable. Christina Greer is an associate professor of political science at Fordham University. Carrie Sheffield is a conservative commentator and founder of Bold TV. And Tim O'Brien is executive editor at Bloomberg Opinion. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Tim, let me just start with you because you have a perspective on Trump that not everybody has. And I'm just curious what you make of the public performance we saw today from him, because I'm trying to read it, and there's two possibilities that jump out at me. One is this a guy who feels cornered and is looking for a way out of this, or is this somebody who's enjoying the moment he's found himself in?
It may be both, because I think he loves being in the spotlight so much that it doesn't matter whether he's cornered or not. If he can get people to pay attention, he loves being in that space. However, he
and at least one other
cornered. And I think one of the things this incident is showing is that the president actually isn't a very good deal maker. The people who supported him said he was going to go to Washington. He was a businessman who would apply business skills and a long history of deal making to getting things done in Washington, draining the swamp, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody who knew actually the particulars and facts of his business history knew that he was repeatedly taken to the cleaner on a lot of significant deals. And the reason was because he didn't bone up on the facts. He lacked the patience to see things through their end, and he usually made it about an appearance of winning rather than authentically getting something he wanted. And I don't think he's familiar with the history of government shutdowns in Washington. I don't think he's interested in giving up ground in order to get a result that might benefit him. And so he's left now without any leverage. And he's aware of it, and I think that's why you're getting all this word salad from him.
Well, that's right, Chris. That's what I'm kind of wondering. And I don't know specifically. I keep trying to imagine what's the specific combination that's going to let everybody come to the table and sign off on something. But I do have this sense, what Tim was just saying, the appearance of winning, the appearance of victory, that's going to have to be an element of this from Trump's standpoint, trying to create that somehow.
Right, and he's trying to shift the narrative. So it's like, oh, so now we can call it the Schumer and the Pelosi. The problem is Nancy Pelosi outmaneuvered him in that meeting that we had a few weeks ago. And so when she walked him into that trap and he just said, yeah, I'll own it. And now he realizes this is real. We have hundreds of thousands of Americans who are not getting paid, right? And so his party is going to suffer pretty soon. Obviously, the winds of change will work against him. And so he is cornered. He's used to just packing up his marbles, filing for bankruptcy, and leaving you holding the bag. He can't do that right now. So he's trying to figure out how he can try and change the frame. But this isn't The Apprentice. We don't have editors who can just all of a sudden change it and make it seem like you're winning when you're not. This is someone who actually, as a lifelong New Yorker, is not a deal maker, right? He, in many ways, anyone who's done business with him in New York knows that he has been a crook. And he does not really know how to do business. Daddy was giving him lots of money. Daddy was constantly covering for him. Daddy was constantly bailing him out. And he was able to build up a reputation that said one thing, but the reality was something totally different. Now we're in Washington, D.C. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, many of the Democrats, they understand the institution of Congress, but we're seeing now they understand the institution of the presidency much better than the president.
So, Carrie, if he doesn't get 100% of what he's asking for, $5.6 billion wall, and his definition of the wall has changed, but let's just say $5.6 billion in a wall. If he does not and is not able to get 100% of that, what could he get that talk radio base that revolted a few weeks ago would go along with him and say it's a victory?
Sure. Well, he has said there might be some talk about if he could declare some sort of national emergency, because let's be honest, we do have a national emergency on our southern border. And anyone who would say otherwise, I would really challenge them and say, look at life expectancy in this country. It's declined for the second time.
Let me just, are you saying that that's what the base needs to hear from him? That short of getting 100%, he's got to go in that direction for them to feel he's getting a win here?
He's got to control the border. And that's how he won. That's how he mopped the floor with the establishment. That's how he mopped the floor when he won the presidency and also the Republican nomination. It was immigration. So I think woe be unto any Democrat who doesn't understand the reason Trump is in the White House is because of immigration. And we do have a border crisis. We do. Life expectancy declined in this country for the second year in a row. We haven't seen that since World War I. One of the key reasons was drugs. And drugs, in an AEI report, showed that drugs, can I finish? Drugs coming over our southern border, fentanyl, is driving a lot of this decline in the life expectancy. This is a crisis. And so I think this
what's the question about the win?
I'm just trying to figure out, right, what does it take? What would we saw a couple weeks ago, his vice president went in there with an offer. It looked like there was going to be a deal here, and talk radio revolted and there was no deal. So I'm saying if he doesn't get 100%, what can he bring back that's not going to produce that
sure,
same result?
I think what he's trying to find is an alternative. If Congress won't come to the table, I think the reason why he didn't get what happened with the Senate, it was Mitch McConnell's fault. Mitch McConnell should have shown leadership. The House, under House Speaker Paul Ryan, passed the bill with the funding. And so Mitch McConnell could have taken the quote-unquote nuclear option the way he did.
Mitch McConnell tried to deliver a deal to Trump months ago, and Trump pulled the plug on it at the last minute.
But it
this is, again, someone who can't
funding.
even do a deal with his members of his own party. This is not Mitch McConnell's fault. This solely resides with President Trump.
No.
If there's a crisis on the southern border,
the House passed a funding bill
which
that
there
included
actually
funding
isn't,
for the border
which
wall.
there actually isn't. Apprehensions on the southern border are at decade lows. There's not a crisis on. That's a manufactured idea.
Well, AEI, which is a very respectable.
Okay, but let's
has talked about the crisis of fentanyl.
Let's reset, because I'm just trying to figure out. The government's been shut down for 2 weeks here, and we know what the position is clearly from Democrats here in the House. They have put their offer on the table. They have passed it. We are waiting, and we just put this out there. We want to see what happens in the Senate, because nothing's happening there now, and there is a question of whether there's going to be some movement from the Cory Gardners and from some of these other vulnerable senators. And then there's a question of what will the president ultimately accept here. And Christine, I guess we listened for an hour and a half today, and rhetorically I heard a lot. I heard a lot of posturing, but I'm unclear. A wall, a fence, money for this. I'm unclear exactly where that line is, where he can say, I will call this a victory and take it.
Right. Well, I mean, we know that the president has to use the wall as a race-baiting tactic to make sure that his base stays with him, because he is creating this dangerous boogeyman that's there. We also know that he just wants to win. So as Tim said, we don't know if he really cares about this wall, if he really cares about the fight. He just likes the posturing. And so when he goes back and talks to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and he's trying to negotiate and make these deals that he's so famous at doing, they are very clear. Nancy Pelosi has said several times, how many ways can I say no? We are not giving you $5 billion. We can talk about sort of securing certain places along the southern border, but we actually don't have this crisis of the caravan that the president is creating, because that's for his talk radio base. Like, that is very clear. So the problem is the president doesn't deal in facts or truth. And so when we're trying to move forward with policy, we have to sort of undo some of his mindset.
So
now,
I would totally disagree.
Hold on, let me finish.
Sure.
So the interesting thing, though, is we also know that this president doesn't respect his own party. So he may actually decide to just do a deal with Nancy and Chuck based on however they configure their negotiation, and leave Mitch McConnell looking...
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess
the win, because he doesn't speak to anyone unless it's via Twitter.
So I'll ask it a different way, Kara. I was asking specifically if you have a sense what he could bring back to the base, and the base would still say it's a victory. How scared of that? How intimidated by the base is he? I guess that's the question I would ask. Then, does he have to go back to them, or could he cut some other kind of a deal here?
Well, that's what I was saying. When he floats the possibility of declaring a national emergency, which would give him access to potential other funds. But I do want to push back on the question of this being a racist trope. I mean, this president has seen historic low unemployment among African Americans that we've never seen in this country. We've also seen historic wins as far as helping with criminal justice reform.
Okay, but again, I'm trying to keep this on the wall. Tim, let me go back to you, Tim. Let me ask you this question this way: Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, the dynamics that Trump, and you were hinting at this before, the dynamics that Trump faced in the business celebrity world that he comes from, versus the dynamics of dealing with somebody like Mitch McConnell. How much overlap is there? A lot or a little?
Well, I mean, he's run a business that promoted him as a marketing tool. He never really built relationships with other people. He's never built strong teams around him. He's never known how to push something through by building relationships with other people. I think that informs his entire relationship with the GOP, regardless of his relationship with Democrats. And what he's focused on here right now isn't the policy. He doesn't have a clear sense of what kind of policy he wants on the southern border, or what kind of policy he wants on immigration. He's focused on the wall because he's concerned about his reputation, which is an entirely different can of worms. And what he is digging in around is he doesn't want to have to say, I didn't get my wall. He doesn't care about whether or not he can have an outcome that said, we are dealing with a rational approach to how to handle migration on the southern border, and here's how we're doing that. He's saying, I'm digging in for a wall because I said I was going to do it. And actually, people in his own party and the opposition don't think it makes sense. And until he lets go of it, he's going to get beaten up on this issue.
But you can't go at 2 blocks in New York without seeing a Trump. The Grand Hyatt was brokered by him at age 28 is when he started
it was brokered by the Pritzkers.
Well, he was the runner for the Pritzkers. He was the one who started. I mean, why is he? His name is everywhere. Why
his name is everywhere?
Well, this is a useful thing to remember because his name is everywhere, but he's not responsible for building a lot of the projects his name's on.
The Woman's Skating Rink came under budget because of his executive.
Well, okay. The government is still shut down. The terms of the standoff are not entirely, and the terms of it are not entirely understood. I think that is what makes this, to me, different than past shutdowns that we've seen. It is unclear to me exactly what the bottom line is for every party that is involved here. I think that's what makes this different, and that's why at the beginning of this I said it looks like the stakes, relatively speaking, in the scheme of the federal budget are not that high, and yet it's going on a lot longer, I think, relative to that than we expected. It's an unusual one. Christina Greer, Carrie Sheffield, Tim O'Brien, thank you for being with us. Hardball, back in just a minute.
Oh.